Wonderful. Well, welcome. Miss Susan and Jean, quite regulars, and Miss Kayla, I think we know each other. And I believe you've done classes with me before, but a warm welcome. But this video is for so many folks that could not be with us tonight. So a warm welcome to everyone that's watching this. My name is Megan, and I'm the owner of Paint and Sip BT, and I do a monthly free art class for folks to take some time for themselves to do something fun and different. So this is this month's art class. And we're going to be doing something a little different, maybe a little challenging, but it's kind of a fun technical skill that we can all practice together. So what we're going to be painting tonight are these beautiful flowers behind me. They're called Lisianthus, and they're gorgeous. I'm going to butcher the name. Somebody probably knows how to say it. And I'm just going to hold them up close so you can just appreciate how gorgeous these purple flowers are. This is our inspiration for tonight. I live down the road from a wonderful farm. It's called Heart and Soil Farm. And she has you cut, pick your own flowers. And this was a featured flower that's really blooming right now, past couple weeks. So it's a really beautiful, really unique flower. It's hard to grow, and she did a wonderful job. So I was like, we don't always take the time to really do a macro, a delicate, intricate flower design. Sometimes we do some small flowers here and there in my classes, and we're going to go ahead and we are going to tackle something new together. So the pencil is going to be helpful because it's going to allow us, for one, to pick out our scale. So how big we want our flower, and then to kind of work on some of the layers. So we're going to do a little bit of drawing, and then we'll kind of start filling in the flower petals, starting from the exterior, painting them and working our way to the interior. And we're going to be using darker and lighter tones of a color on each petal to create that depth. It's going to be so fun. If there's any questions throughout tonight's class, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. This is a very open, supportive community, so do not hesitate to chime in. With regards to colors tonight, I'm inspired to paint light purple flowers. These also come in white, and they also come in a light pink. So you pick what color flower you might want to do. You can pick your own color, and you can follow the light purple and the dark purple instructions, that lighter and darker tone along the way. And then the background color. We're primarily going to be focusing on that flower intricacy. I was thinking about it before we started around how many flowers am I going to do? And I was like, oh, I could do a nice cluster of three big flowers. And I was like, that might take a long time. Sometimes when we get into the details, it takes quite a long time, doesn't it? So to be mindful of tonight's window, I'm going to do one large flower. And then if I want to tuck more in and around after, we can. So I want you to think about the number of flowers that you might want to do. But we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. I'm going to try to use a pencil. If you can't see it, I will switch to a Sharpie just to help you see some of my outlining in my drawing. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So again, I'm going to paint here with you along the way. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm using, what I'm painting on tonight is, I'm painting on acrylic paper. So if anyone likes to paint often and you don't want to go buy canvas boards, I use this acrylic paper. I'm just going to flip it over so you can see it. It's by Canson, and I use 11 by 14 paper. It's oil and acrylic paper, and it's awesome. They come out in it's a nice thick sheet, and you can paint right on this, and it's quite lovely. So one of the first things I want you to do is you can kind of look at the inspiration that's here next to me, and you can think about what you want your cluster to look like. If you want to do one big flower, if you wanted to do one smaller flower. And you can either paint from what you see over here on my screen. You can look at the chat window, which I've uploaded 2 images. And I'm inspired today to paint I'll paint the second picture. So the purple images that I sent, those photographs I took last week in person. Just absolutely stunning. So I want you to either go onto Google search, find an inspiration that works for you. And we're going to draw this together. I want you to think about how big you want this object to be. So we're going to first do the outline together. And for me, ladies, I am going big. So my flower is going to be very large. I mean, like the whole thing is going to be one big flower. So what I want you to think about is the positioning of your flower. So is it going to be head on? Are you going to be looking at it straight on like this? Is it going to be slightly turned? So I'm doing the second one, and the bottom of the flower is kind of more rounded, and it's kind of pointing up to the left a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the outline of the flower, and I'm going to do some basic petal shapes, just outlining the petal. And I will use a Sharpie because you can't see my pencil, and I'll just paint over my Sharpie lines. It's a little scary for me to use Sharpie, but I'm going to be courageous tonight with you all. So we're going to do an outline of your petal. So there's kind of a rounded petal here. Some of these petals are a little shorter. And I'm just kind of figuring, see how big I'm doing my flower? I'm doing macro. Some petals coming here. And these are all the outlying petals. And I'm just kind of following my eye. Now you can always change the shape. We will make the edging a little bit more jagged. But where you go out and you come in, I'm just doing a rough outline. And I can always change this. So you can see it's not perfectly even, which is okay. And I'm going to add more petals in. So now that I have this basic outline, and again, you might be doing a couple of flowers. I'm just going to do one large one. I'm going to find the center of my flower, and I'm going to look at some of the objects on the interior. So I think about, well, where is the middle of the flower? And for me, it's kind of down here a little bit because this is more fluffy with petals here on the top. So sometimes it's good to use your hands to think about placement and positioning. And I'm going to draw a little bit of a budded petal shape in here. So start to just draw in some petaled lines. And you can change the shape of these. And I want you just to look at what's going on. You maybe even count the number of layers of petals that are coming from the middle of the flower to the exterior. Now, if I count this flower right next to me, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of petals. So I want you to be creative as you're looking at whatever one you're doing. I want you to layer in a number of petals. So for me, mine is kind of an open face here. So I'm going to do a petal here. I'm going to tuck in a smaller petal here. Just ever so slightly. Start to give your picture a little bit of layering with petals. There's an open petal here. See how it got wider? That makes it look more open. And you can have some thin petals. Some of these can be really thin. That makes it look a little bit more natural. See how I'm starting to create some of the forms for these petals? These are just basic lines. And ever so slightly, continue to build these petals. I'm going to go around and just build these petals all on top of one another. You can tuck in some smaller petals. See how I just did a little line right there? So for me, I did the exterior outline, and then I just did just a few lines. You can always add more layers in here. This is just a starting place. But take a look at the shape of the petals. Maybe this one is wide this way and then comes in. It's okay for your petals to kind of like take their own form. It's okay for them to layer. And these petals have a lot of texture on the edges. We'll do more of that with the brush in itself. But then maybe, you know, you can count the number of layers that you want. For me, I'm starting to get close to these bigger petals. So where your exterior lines kind of go down and come up, this is where you can start to bring in or bring down these petals. So see how I use this rounded edge? I came down and I started to connect it a little bit. But make sure you have enough petals kind of going around first before you do something like that. Just giving you an example. So you can count. So I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty close with my layers of 5 here. I might do another thin petal layered in here. And then I can start carving space out for these bigger petals. So the more layers you do, the more layers you're gonna have to fill in and paint in. But this is you, right? You be playful. But you can see I have this beautiful kind of pieced together flower. And just go and just make sure all your petals are just a little bit outlined. And you can do thin petals, they don't need to be big. And I'm giving it a little bit of a wave for texture. Doesn't have to be natural. Sorry, it doesn't have to be perfectly rounded. So take your time. I'm not going to get too crazy with the detail because we're going to be painting in a lot of this. But take your time. I'm inspired in the picture I'm looking at. There's these beautiful buds, and you can see them up here too. They're really pretty. I'm inspired just to draw a couple of these buds too. They're really unique. So any other objects that you kind of want to draw in now, feel free. This is just a little bit of nature. I'm just kind of incorporating in here. I might put like a little bit of a leaf. Let's see if there's any leaves. I think we stripped all the leaves off of these. So just take a minute just to, if you wanted to draw anything else in here. I'm going to try to find a little bit of balance. So let's see here. Whenever I paint something, I try to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I might just do another small head down here of this object. And this is just a little scenery. I might just do a couple of leaves. This is where, as an artist, you always want to embrace your own ideas. I might do another stem up in the corner. Couple of gentle leaves. And for me, these might be like a really light green, just an accent. There we go, just a little bit of balance. Maybe I'll do a little bit of a leaf coming in here. You get your own ideas as you start to, the more you paint, the more you'll kind of start to get your own style. or you'll be more open to experimenting as well. So I'm not going to go too crazy, but I just added a little bit more floral around this. So what I'll do is I'm going to check in with you all. You can give me a thumbs up. You can say, Megan, I need another minute, but let me know how you're doing. All right, I have a thumbs up from Miss Susan. All right, I think I have a thumbs up from Kayla. Awesome. And Miss Jean's working away. Okay, so I want you to think about what colors you want, and we're going to start applying color together. So I'm going to do a light purple. So I'm going to make a light purple color, and we're going to make 2 tones of our purple. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm just going to make a purple first, keep it simple. And then we're just going to add a little bit of white to make a secondary lighter tone. So the size brush that I'm going to use is, this is a number 3 brush. It's kind of a medium, kind of long tipped brush. I'm going to make a purple. So blue, and I'm using pink because I have pink. I have lots of pink. And I'm using the old paints that I've had. I'm not using the new ones that I send to many of my customers. I'm just using paints that I have on hand. And I'm going for a light purple. So you're going to see this is a pretty dark purple, but I'm going to keep it, but I'm going to grab a little bit. There you go. Sorry. I'm going to keep a little bit of that the way it is because I'll use that for an interior color. So this is going to go kind of on the base side of the flower. So on the tips of the flower towards the outside of each petal is going to be lighter. So the darker tones are going to go down towards the middle area. So if you wanted to take a little bit of this darker color and do a little bit of outlining of some of these interior petals, you could, if you wanted to just be a little playful, you could just do a little bit of outlining because the middle of the flower is very, very dense and darker. So for some of these interior petals where the middle of the flower is darker, I know that it's going to be a little bit darker in here. So I might use my brush. I might dip my brush in a little bit of water. You can kind of play with the opacity of the paint. Do a little bit of light of a little bit of water. And it will just soften. And I'm leaving lots of white space, but I'm just starting to just create especially in the middle. I'm not doing too much outside of the middle area, but I'm just doing a little bit of outlining some of these, the bottom of some of these objects. Because this is where more shade or more darkness will occur, right? These are the hidden petals that are kind of tucked within. And we'll use this more as we go. Excellent. And one technique, if you wanted to try it, if you wanted to find some of these lines of petals on the exterior of these petals, you could do a little bit of a darker line on some of these. See how I'm doing it? I'm not doing it on the interior of the petal. I'm doing it on the exterior. And that's saying, hey, underneath this is a little darker. And you can do that in some areas. And again, I'm not using pure paint. I'm actually using purple with this darker purple with a little bit of water. So anywhere you feel like there may be shade. So look for the darker tones of purple. You can add in a little bit of the darker purple on the outside of these petals. So if I look at the picture, there's a little bit of darker purple on the underside of that one over there. Again, I took a little dollop of water and I mixed it with the darker purple here. On the outside of this petal, it's a little darker, and I'm just doing a nice thin line. We have a lot of work we're going to do, but this is just kind of taking our time, kind of setting the stage for what the work is that we're doing here. Beautiful. And again, I'm doing the outside of some of these petals, because the interior of these petals directly on the other side is going to be much lighter in color. So take a few minutes and play with this technique. We're just starting to create a little bit of shading. We'll do more of this. Up here, it's much lighter for me. The details are really going to be kind of on the edging of these petals. So if you wanted to just do a little bit of outlining in some areas, you could do a little bit of outlining. There's so many different ways of painting a flower like this. It's just about going for it, being courageous. Again, a little paint, a little water. I have a nice tip on this brush going around the exterior of the edge. This is where your flower is really going to come to life. And if anyone needs anything from me, do not hesitate to ask. Happy to help. I'm just going to do a little bit of this purple outlining on a little bit of each of these, because the outside edges of these petals are going to be a little darker, because there's the lighting changes. And that's where if you start to study these flowers and the colors on these petals, the tips of these petals are much lighter, and because that's where the light is hitting them. And then the color changes because there's depth, because there's the shading and the shadowing of this object. So on the edge of every one of these petals is a little bit of shade, because that's where the petal is ending. So on the other side of the edge, there's less light, and that's why you need this darker edge. So I'm using a very thin, this is number 3 right on the tip. I'm just doing a little bit on each of these, because we'll use this. I'm not going too crazy. The nice thing about acrylics, just to remind you, is that if you do too much, if this is too dark of a purple, don't worry. You can always come in and adjust it. And we're really gonna come in with the whiter and the lighter colors to really make these edges a little bit more rigid. Like these flowers have really rigid edges. If you look really close, it's quite pretty. Now I'm not going to do my flowers in greens. This is all going to be green toned. These buds, I might do like a little bit of a soft purple, but I'm going to keep the dark purple purely focused here in this space. I'll pause. How's this going for everybody? I think this is so fun. I hope you're having fun. All right, we'll take your time, just kind of outlining here and there, and then we're going to switch to making a lighter tone. And then we'll start filling in these petals together, because we're going to bring in more darker colors, bring in the lighter colors. But we've at least started creating some contrast. And if you wanted to play with some of the jaggedness, you could on some of these exterior petals. It's a little advanced, but I'm not quite there yet. I also have these black Sharpie lines. I'm sure many of you will cover your paint right up. Also, if you're using pencil or a Sharpie, if you add water to any paint, it's going to kind of dim down the pigment. Don't worry, we're going to be adding in a lot more. We're going to add in our light purple next, or our lighter tone. So as you're all working on that, I'm going to make my lighter purple. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a dollop of white in a clean spot right there on my plate. And I'm gonna mix my lighter purple together. I'm gonna use the same brush. If you wanted to use a different brush, you could. It's absolutely up to you. For me, this is gonna be a very soft, delicate purple. So I'm gonna take just a little bit of purple and mix it with my white because I want it to be very light in color. So when you're ready, go ahead and mix this lighter color. And in the chat, go ahead and type in, if you can, what color flowers you're doing. If you're doing purple, if you're doing yellow, if you're doing pink. Or you can unmute if that's easier. Ooh, Kayla's doing purple. Awesome. All right. And this is kind of a pinky purple to me. So find the right color for these flowers for you. I just added a little bit of pink to my purple because I want it to be a little bit more pinky purple. So I'm going to go with this color. It's just more of like a softer, delicate purple. And I like the little pink on it. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to slowly start filling in and painting our flowers. So our petals together. So we're going to start from the exterior. And again, if you haven't finished outlining, you can go ahead and do that first, but just start from the exterior and we're going to slowly work our way around the petal edge. And this is where you can cover up that pesky pencil line. You need to go back in. For me, I'm going to go back in with some of the darker purples, but this is where you can come in and we're going to be painting the background another color too, but start to fill in the top half of one petal, this lighter color. And then I'll show you what we're going to do. So I'm just picking one petal and I'm painting in kind of the first top half of it. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the darker color and I'm going to make a mid-tone. So it's kind of an intermediary color. So I'm taking some of my light purple and some of my darker purple, and I'm making a mid-tone purple. And I want you to use this mid-tone purple and play with blending these colors. This is where the magic happens, ladies and gents. We're doing one petal at a time. Slowly take this mid-tone and sweep it up into the lighter tone. See that blend that I'm getting? Oh yeah, that's the sweet spot. This is why we're here, is to play with blending colors. I'm gently sweeping up into the lighter purple. So for each petal, and if you want to bring in a little bit of the darker purple on the bottom side, you can. But this is going to be really relaxing. This is the primary focus of tonight's class, is to, again, using this mid-tone color really does the magic of blending the lighter. And I'm sweeping this mid-tone up and in, and you can always go back and get some of the lighter tone if you need to help blend that. Just gentle sweeps, soft little brush strokes. See that beautiful gradient that just happened? So you can manage how much of a light petal that you want and how much of a darker of a transition. So I'm going to repeat this for all the exterior petals first. Now you don't need such a drastic change. So I'm just going to pick the next petal over. And if you feel like you're losing an edge of a petal, you can go back and to get one of your darker colors and kind of go along the edge. Again, if you need to kind of hold space. I just did a little line right there just to kind of hold space. But you start with that light purple. You do the exterior edge first. paint about half of it. Nice and slow. And I'm going to use just a little bit of the medium purple just to fill in closer towards the center. And you'll see and use your own eye on how much shading you might want to add to the bottom of that petal. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask, but I'm just going to rinse and repeat using the very light purple. And don't worry, this is not the last step to these petals. We're just doing basic, filling it in a most basic way. And it just takes a little practice and a little patience, but look at all these petals you have to practice with. And again, where you want to start your transition, this is the shading. This is where the petal, the shading represents where the petal starts to hide behind the scenes a little bit. I'm going back and forth between the dark purple and the light purple as I fill these in. You do not need to clean your brush. Just gently tap, go back and forth. And if you need more of a contrast, you can. But for me, I can still see it. It's still very subtle. But this is where you kind of lean back in your chair and you can decide if you want it to be a little more shaded, just go and tap and get a little bit more of the darker and just do a little bit of a brush stroke. That mid-tone purple is truly going to help you fill that bottom half of the petal. And we will be adding even a little bit more of brighter spots to some of these petals at the end as well. So just take a couple of deep breaths and just work your way around. Again, the lighter color goes on the edge. You can fill about halfway. And I'm going to grab that mid-tone purple. And if you need to mix more, you can. And I'll show you what my colors look like. So that's my lighter purple there. And then I have, ooh, Kayla's doing lots of flowers. Look at that. And then this is my mid-tone purple. And then this is my dark purple that I'm using to kind of create my mid-tone purple, right? Because this mid-tone is really helping me fill in. There we go. Just gentle sweeps. And then if you need to go back and get a lighter color to kind of help the blending, you can just, if you do a soft feather, like a little bit of a drag, that will help. But sometimes you have to just do a couple coats. If it doesn't come out right the first time, that's okay. Again, leaning back in your chair and getting that perspective is really helpful too. You can always come in and add little bits of shading if you want it here and there. You can use a little bit of that mid-tone on the edges. Kind of highlight one petal from another. The smaller the brush you use, like the more kind of realistic it will look. We're just going to work our way all the way around the clock at our own pace. And again, we could all spend many hours on this, but we're here just to practice and be playful with this technique together. And we'll see how far we get. I'll keep moving along. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask, but I'm sure you're all doing great. And if you're watching this video, you're welcome to, in the comment section of the video, ask any questions as well. And sometimes your light might be shining funny, so feel free to like turn your canvas and check out. But that even that subtle mid-tone purple will start to give that petal a little bit of shading, which is exactly what we're trying to do. We're saying, hey, this petal is ending and another one is coming. So play with that darker purple and that mid-tone to truly create that separation. See down here is a nice transition, and you can always go back and touch up any of these, but we're just doing some nice basic colors, working our way around. Simple 3 tones. And again, this light purple is outlining the petal, the whole kind of the exterior edge. So some of your petals might be different shapes. Embrace the petal shape that you've created, because using that mid-tone will help hold that unique shape. So blending one color to another. So this one's going to be a little bit different. It's a little bit of a curve, which is okay. So I'm just being playful with how I blend these together. If I want to add more contrast, I can. I may say, okay, well, I can't see the difference on where one petal meets another. So just grab a little bit of a darker purple and kind of outline just a little bit. And we'll come in with a lighter color. You can always touch that darker purple line up. So try not to take that too seriously, but you can always use that mid-tone purple or the darker purple just to kind of re-highlight your flower petals. But again, I'm just taking my time, filling in one petal at a time, always doing that lighter exterior first. Filling it in about halfway. And then grabbing some of that mid-tone. You're going to make more of this as you go along the way, more organically. And you can figure out where you might even want like a little bit more of a darker purple. So you can play with how dark or how light this mid-tone is. I'll show you what a little bit of a darker shading looks like. So this is, you can see by adding a little bit of a darker shade. And if you don't like something, guess what? You can always come over it and always modify. Always come in and just soften it ever so slightly. You can do little dabs to kind of play with the color and fill it in a little bit. This is some of the refinement that we'll do around where you see lightness and where you see darkness, but we're just going around kind of around this to kind of fill in our petals as a first step. In the middle of our flower is going to have the most contrast. So we're doing light right now. We're all working our way around. Some of you may have less petals than me. I'm not sure. We haven't counted our petals together. But we definitely want nice light exteriors around these petals. That's why we're going all the way around. And we'll even make some of these exteriors even a little lighter, as I said. And if you wanted to play with that now, you could even make a lighter, like a super light purple, to play with like a little bit of delicate lightness on the edge. I'll show you what it looks like. We're going to do this as a final touch, but I'll show you what it looks like if you wanted to try it. So I just put another dollop of white, and what I'm doing is I just got a little bit of the light purple and I'm just kind of putting it next to it. I grabbed a little bit of the white, and I'm going to show you what a little bit of a light touch is. So even you can just do a little bit of a light touch blending, and this will really stand out more when we have our background color in. But you can even add a little bit more of a softer touch on some of these just to really highlight the edges. Sweeping it in. So we'll be doing more of this lightness, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of a glimpse of like where we're going. See how it's really highlighting the edge? This is going to all be incredibly beautiful as we continue to work our way around. So we'll be getting there in a minute. If anyone has any comments or questions, do not hesitate to ask. But everybody's doing great. You're in the zone. If you need anything, please feel free to unmute and ask or use the chat. But this is really a class for you to practice and to play with something new. Again, very time consuming, but it's going to be really quite beautiful when we're done. That's why I picked one flower versus many, because I knew I was going to slow us down with all these details so that we could play with this macro experience. But that's all right. That's why we're here. It's fun to try something new together. And I'm going to use this mid-tone purple to fill these in. And again, the blending from the lighter purple to the darker purple is really important. Just gentle, soft sweeps. It'll help it look more natural. And it's just a subtle change of color, but I'm sure you're starting to notice the difference. And we're going to make the edging of these flowers look a little bit more natural. Again, about halfway. Some of these are really big petals, so I'm doing like a full half coverage with my light purple, because these petals are big. Some of these are really beautiful on the outside edges. As we get towards the interior, they're going to get a little smaller. Again, I'm just mixing a little bit more mid-tone to kind of bring in and feather in. And you could do some texture. You don't have to just do like a round rainbow kind of swipe. You can do some texture to kind of fill this in. And you can also decide if you wanted to make some of these a little bit lighter. You don't need to have, you can have some truly lighter petals by just bringing in a little bit more white. So you have a lot of tools and I'm giving you lots of tips. So feel free to evolve this process as you wish. I soften that petal just a little bit, and I may not want so much dark, and I can make those adjustments as we go. All right, ladies, I'm almost all the way around my flower here. What we'll do is, and I'm moving probably pretty quickly, we'll do our first kind of show and tell if folks are interested in showing off their work. About 5 minutes, so keep an eye on the clock. But what we're going to do is we're going to continue this technique as we come around. So you're just going to keep following these petals. Wherever there's a line is where you're putting the lighter purple. So these are going to get pretty narrow. And then you're going to do the mid-tone below it. And this is kind of where you have to lean back in your chair to make sure that you can see the difference. And you can play with the blending. I have a little bit of glare on mine, so I'm going to have to turn it a little bit. But you can start to see when you put the lighter petal over the darker purple petals, that's this transition that we're going towards. So that's why the where you have your petaled lines, you're doing the lighter outline because it's going to contrast as you work your way in and around. It's going to contrast against that mid-tone purple as you work your way around the circle here, which is quite fun. So be mindful of, you can also play with the shapes of some of these petals against that mid-tone purple as you go, which is really quite fun. So you use this lighter purple to shape that petal. And if you need to switch to a smaller brush at any time, you may. I'm okay right now, but I'm definitely going to be switching to a smaller brush in a little bit, just to kind of get into all those nooks and crannies, because we're going to maintain that lighter purple outline and that mid-tone purple kind of fill in. That's where we're going to see our layers as we work our way around. And again, you can control how dark that mid-tone purple is. You can be playful of how soft and how fluffy that may be. That's one of the characteristics I loved about this flower is that it's so fluffy and has so many layers. So pretty. So just use your gut, and you know that lighter purple, you can come in and layer. You can do some texturing, which is kind of just mixing, being really thoughtful of like how you mix one color with another on the like on the canvas. So where you have a lighter purple, where you have a darker purple. You obviously want there to be like a pretty decent color difference between this lighter purple and the darker purple. It's going to get a little bit more tricky as you come in. That's why it's good that we did all the lines up front, but we're just going to maintain the same technique. And this is where it might feel like it's getting a little bit more tricky, but if you hold true to what we've been doing around the whole exterior, this will work for you. So again, on the line of the petal, holding that lighter line and then using the darker mid-tone for the fill-in. So it might get tight in some places. Just if you need to use a darker purple on like the bottom half of a petal. So like as an example right here, I have a couple of really tiny layers. I'm going to use a darker purple to make sure that I see the difference visually. So I'm just going to tuck in a little bit of a darker purple here. And I might even grab like a little bit of the really darker purple just to show you. So see how I'm tucking in just little kind of a thin dabbed outline of the darker purple right here. And it's just saying, hey, Megan, there's a petal here. I'll bring it a little closer. I use a very thin brush and I kind of use the darker purple just to outline the exterior edge, just so I wouldn't lose it. And there's actually another one right here too. You can kind of come in and just do a little bit of like a dabbing to say, hey, there's a petal here. I think there's one actually right here too. So you can use this darker purple to kind of like hold the lines a little bit if you wanted to. You don't have to. In some of our later techniques, you can actually use a little bit more lightness on the edge of that petal. See that, to bring it to life. So we'll do more of that. That's another technique I'll show you. So where we did the lighter purple on the edging, you can use like more like the whitish purple just to do a little bit of an outline. And you can see how the lighter purple with the darker contrast next to it really highlights that edge. So play with using those different tones. So I'm going to go back to the books, ladies. I'm going to make sure I have my light purple. I'm running out of light purple, so guess what? I need to make some more. Take the time just to mix the colors so you have all three of those tones. That's a really important thing. So that light purple is really important for me because that's what I'm using to outline. So I'm making more of that because this is my starter. So I need this. This is my most important one right now. Because as I work my way around, I need that lighter purple to highlight the edge of the petal. Remember, I'm filling in half of the petal with this lighter purple. And if I sound like a broken record, I'm sorry, but this is a rinse and repeat kind of project. Just reminds us on what the step is. Again, the whole petal right up against, so we're going in, it's on the inside of another one, which is really fun because you can start to see the contrast. So I'm filling in halfway because I want to see the lighter petal. For me, that's important to me. Then you can get some of the mid-tone and just start to soften it. And while the lighter one's wet, it will help you kind of blend it in, which is really nice. And again, if you wanted to make it a little bit more contrast, you can add a little, you can make this like second half of the petal as dark as you want it to. That is what really is going to help. So you can see I brought in some darker purple right here. All right, so keep working my way around. So again, on the inside of that petal line, light purple. Filling in. Some of these petals are going to be really tiny. This is where I might downsize pretty quickly here. I have some bigger petals over here, so I might jump over there before I grab a smaller brush. But as you get to the interior of some of these, having using like a #1 brush would be really helpful. Ooh, very pretty. And everybody's working away. I'll keep an eye on the clock. We'll check in when the timing is right here. I'll give everyone a little bit more time before if anybody wants to show, that's fine. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to ask, but I'm sure everybody's doing great. But just having a little bit of patience. This is a new type of, we use this technique often. It's just we don't always spend this much time on it because we're doing other things. But tonight's class is really focused on how can we use this technique to bring an object so big to life? And this is such a good example of using depth and colors to do that. So I'm going to do a couple of these big petals appear before I switch to a smaller brush. And I need to make sure this is bright enough, white enough. So if it's not bright enough, if it's not white enough, it's not going to stand out the way that I want it to. So if your petals are all blending in with one another, make that lighter purple lighter, add more white to it. And that's what I just did. This needs to stand out against the medium purple. Adding a little bit more white will truly give us that brightening effect, that highlighted petal effect, which is what we're going for on the edge. And then we fill in the bottom half of that petal, the darker color. Take a deep breath. You're all doing great. Don't be too hard on yourself if you're having a hard time. We're all having fun and practicing together. I haven't done anything like this in a very long time, so it's fun experimenting and playing with you tonight. That's why we're here, just to kind of let loose, do something a little bit different and new. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat or comments. Happy to help you along the way here. I'm going to do one more petal and then we can kind of do a round of show and tell, or if folks just don't want to show and keep working, that's fine too. But I always love taking an opportunity for us to check in on one another with our progress. And see how that was not, where to just paint this in. That's like really close to that purple. So I need to make sure that that's a little bit lighter. So I want my edges of my petals to be lighter, a little bit lighter. So I'm making the white is my friend, holding true that my light purple really needs to be lighter than that mid-tone. So it's just continuing to check yourself because that will really help our success here. All right, let's make that a little bit lighter. And I can always make this purple mid-tone behind it a little darker too, just to highlight that. Remember, you can use the darker purple to really highlight an outside edge of a petal. So just be playful in that regard. Okay. So I'm going to go get a little mid-tone and then we will, once I finish this petal, we'll do our first round of show and tells here. If folks are open to that. I can answer any questions. If you're having if there's any challenging parts, I can help you. with something that you might need to fix or correct. But again, and I'm going to use a smaller brush here in a minute because I don't want to lose sight of any of these petals. So by using a darker purple or the medium to kind of outline, that's helpful. Okay, I'm going to put my brush down. It's difficult. We're all sucked in, right? All right. So I'm going to remove my spotlight and I'm going to put my view onto gallery. And oh, awesome. Kayla, I love that you have multiple flowers. I'm incredibly jealous. All right, Miss Susan and Miss Jean, how's this going? I'm sure Miss Jean's taking her time, which I appreciate. Kayla, those look awesome. Oh, Susan, well done. Oh, see, I'm taking such a long time. Susan, you're zooming. I love it. Kayla, those are beautiful. I love yours. Love, love. So pretty. And Miss Jean's probably going as slow as I am here. All right, everybody keep up the good work. I love it. I know that Jean's very detail oriented. So I'm going to keep going. If folks have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, but well done. I'm going to go ahead and put my video back onto Spotlight. Wonderful. And I'm going to keep working my way around. And I'm going to intently switch to a smaller brush. I have a couple larger parts, but I'm going to use the smaller brush. I switched to a number 1 because I know it's going to get tight in some of these places. So I'm going to try to zoom and do some of these a little bit more quickly. But you know what? And I say this in all these classes is that I want you to always take your time. And I should probably listen to be myself and do my own thing in that regard too. It's okay to not rush. It's okay just to do your thing. For tonight's class, I want to be able to show you all these details in a certain amount of time. But take your time on following these instructions. I'm doing these light purple outlines ever so just to highlight some of these differences. And then again, I switch to the interior darker colors. But as you work your way towards the middle, I want you to just keep in mind where you want to have darker colors and where you want to have lighter colors. And this is where I want you to kind of lean back and be a little bit of a Picasso along the way here. And some of you are really already doing that. I'm really impressed. Susan has done such a good job of that already tonight, of just saying, okay, well, where do I want to have darker colors? Where do I want to have lighter colors? And that's where you can really just use your eye just to start to ever so slightly fill in some of these details where you want the transition of the lightness and the darkness to be. But you know to use the lighter color for the edge of the petal. That's the important thing. So all the work that you spent outlining these petals, make sure you have that lightness tucked in. But you know that you can use that darker edge for contrast. Now this can get as abstract or as finite in detail as you wish. And it's hard, like this is so this is the success with macro pieces. If you see these beautiful macro paintings, is the size of the brush. That's really where you see the success. So for me, I'm not using like the most smallest brushes tonight. I'm using what I have on hand. However, if I had a very tiny brush, which I think I have one somewhere, it could look very different. I could be very meticulous with what colors I put in where and how big those brush strokes are. But for me tonight, I am just going to continue to embrace the colors that I have and these techniques. And we'll do this together. But it's a great opportunity to practice how to add colors and to focus on the center of some of these objects. So I'm starting to just pepper in some of the lighter purples and medium purples on the interiors. I do still want to maintain and hold space for the lighter purple. So that's still really important to me, again, around the exterior, because I don't want to lose sight of these petals. But you will start to darken a little bit in the middle. So the middle of the flower will be a little darker. So that's where I want you to switch to medium tones where it makes sense. So if you look at the picture, the petals in the middle of these flowers are getting darker, which means we're going to use more mid-tone purples and more darker purples compared to these lighter purples. So you can use maybe your darker purple to fill in, and you can use your mid-tone for the outlines. So you'll get an eye for this. Start to transition ever so slowly. So for me, as I get to these interior petals, I'm going to use the darker purple for some of the outlining, and I'll use some of the mid-tone purple for the outlining, and use some of the darker tone purple to fill in. So you can play with that transition. But you'll notice things like some of the petals in the middle of your flower, they might be lighter. So I'm going to put a couple of lighter petals in the middle of this flower just to hold space for that. I have some of those. You can do soft, gentle brush strokes. If you have any, I have some goopy parts, so I'm just doing soft, gentle brush strokes just to kind of cover up some of the goopy parts. And we'll come in and do refinements. But that lighter purple will give you the edge. Will give you that edge of the petal, and it will continue to stand out for you if you hold it. So if you lose a sight of an edge of a petal, go back with that lighter purple and use that to bring it back to life, to hold that amongst all the other colors. And you could just come in and find those edges if you wanted to. So for me, I'm just kind of coming in and making sure I'm holding some of these lighter purple edges, because the middle can get very intricate, and we'll do more of that. The middle is probably the most complicated part, but we got it. So I'm just going to continue to stick to my guns here. I'm going to do my light purple. I'm going to keep working my way around, and we'll meet in the middle. If you need to take a break and pivot to doing any of these, if you did any exterior flowers, you can. I always encourage you to go at your own pace and do whatever step is most important to you. But I'm going back to my light purple here, making sure I have this, because I might want to add more of this in some places. See. Okay. So with my light purple, I'm going to continue this exercise of doing, again, these out exteriors. Filling in about halfway. Again, maintain this as long as you can. And then you can decide when you want to transition to making the interior of your flower a little darker. So I'm not quite there yet. I was playing with it a little bit. I got sucked into it. It's okay. But I'm going to, again, layer a little bit of a darker mid-tone purple. That mid-tone purple is key because it helps with the transition. And the softer you blend these colors together, the softer your petal will look. So that's why it's fun to kind of play with blending your petals a little bit. And if you have the wrong tone of purple, don't worry. You can always paint over it. We're using acrylic tonight, and acrylic dries so fast. So you can always come in and do some smooth brush strokes, some little dabs, just to elegantly blend one layer to another. You might have missed a layer like me, so just come in and find your edge, that light edge. Anywhere you feel like you may have missed an edge, just come in with that lighter color. Or a little shading on the back side of the lighter color to hold. There we go. Look, it's a little bit of a dark purple on the back side, on like the underside of a petal, will really help with the shading. So if I really can't see a petal, if I go along the outside of it with a really thin brush, I can ever so slightly. Kayla has nice dark outlines for her petals, so she actually doesn't even need to do this because she can see some of her petal stuff. But for me, I'm losing sight, so I'm kind of coming in with the edge, and I'm just doing a little bit of a light purple outline, like the dark purple outline on the outside of some of these. And you can see how that just helped bring out all those edges. Look how tiny those lines are right there. Beautiful. I'm just going to continue to work my way around. I still see white petals. I want those to be filled in. So I'm going back to my light purple to again fill that edge. Having a little patience with the project. I think we're also excited to see how this will look. All right, this is the anticipation of, oh my gosh, what is this going to turn into? Filling it in my petals with this lighter purple, or the medium tone purple, excuse me. And just leaning back in your chair and just getting the colors right for what they need to be for you. This is what we could do refinements along the way, but this is where you can kind of start to refine one area and another. And we could spend over 3 hours on a class like this, but I'm going to get you started, and then you can continue to play and refine with some of these techniques. Because we could be here for a very long time. But now you at least have a few of these techniques in your pocket to play. And I'm just using that lighter purple to outline. You can always use the tip of your brush to have a little bit of a, you could do a dark purple outline on some of these. It's quite pretty. And this is some of the refinements that we'll do. But if you lose any of these petals, just come in and just with the tip, just do a little bit of an outlining of a petal with a darker color. And that will help you give some of that shadow as well. Just a little bit. I'm going to try to do nice smooth brush strokes from blending one color to another. And if anyone has any questions, please let me know. You're all doing great. It's really just being open-minded on when you use different purples and how you blend these all in from one another without losing the shape of your flower that we started with, right? It's one of the trickiest parts, but it just takes a little practice. I'm not perfect. This is not going to be perfect, and that's all right. We're here to just play with one another and give it a shot. And you only get better with practice. And I'm using a little bit of the darker purple, tiny tiny bit on the edge of my brush just to outline some of these. This is like a light drag. This isn't even like a full brush stroke. This is just a light drag around some of these petal edges. You may notice this is where, as you start to get in the middle, this is where it can get a little tricky, because you want to still see some of your petals, but you'd want to get a little darker in color. So my advice is to, wherever you see those lines, be sure to use a lighter color to outline, because you don't want to lose shape of where the flower petal is, like where the shading is and where the petal is. But you can still see I have some darkness, so that's good. But I have a line here, so I am going to do a little bit of lightness here, and then use your mid-tone to kind of tuck in and around and try to fill in the white gaps. May not be perfect. You can continue to do refinements in the middle, but try to fill in the white gaps. And wherever you see those black lines, be sure, or those pencil marks, be sure to put some white right there, because that is a petal. That was a mark that you put as a petal, and we want to make sure we see that. So for me, I'm looking for any of those black lines, and I'm making sure I put white or that lighter purple right there. And that holds the edge of the petal above everything else, which is what we want. So we maintain that same technique. So I have a mid-tone here, but I also have a black line, and I'm going to make sure there's a white or a very light purple on top of that line, because that is a petal edge, and that needs to be lighter. See how I just created and I held that petal edge right there? That was really important. And I just did another one over there. So look for those petal edges, and that's what's going to bring the center of this flower to life, is holding those darker edges, those lines you did initially. And it's not going to be perfect, but just use a very small brush. You could even use, I'm probably going to switch to using the smallest brush that I send typically in my classes is a 2/0 fraction brush. I'll probably do more detail in the middle using that. But just make sure all of your petals are filled in before you jump into the middle. I jumped ahead, I got excited. Many of you probably noticed that. All right, I'm gonna finish these petals, and we'll do some of these additional techniques together around highlighting an edge of a petal with that darker purple. Oh my gosh, so fun. We'll do that in just a minute. And like most of my flowers has been filled in. So I'm just gonna like let it dry and let it think about itself here for a minute. I'll show you how to do some of these edge techniques because they make such a big difference. And I'll show you where I've done some of it already. All right. All right. Welcome, Miss Gail. I have recorded the class tonight. So one of the things that we're going to do now is, if anybody wants to, using like the darker purple, I'm using a very fine brush, and on the outside of any of these lighter petals, you could do a little thin brush stroke just to highlight the edge. Quite lovely. It just adds a little bit of natural shading. And this is where you can add some of that leafy texture. So if you wanted to do like up and down, if you wanted to give it a little bit of a natural petal edge, you can use this detail to do that. So I'm I'm going to take a little break from trying to figure out the middle. I'm not worried about that yet, but I can come around and I can do a little bit of edging on my petals. And again, I look for the white edges, that lighter purple is where my petals are. And at the beginning, we talked about how we were going to try to do like 5 layers of petals, right? So this technique will help you find those 5 layers of petals if you decided to do that. And if you don't want to use this dark color, you don't have to. Ooh, and I have like a funky edge right here. Funny. So beautiful. So I'm going to do this dark technique around each of these petals. A little bit of a tiny dark edge, and it is not a perfect line. But you can see how it's creating that shading for the work that you've just done. And you may not be completed yet. And again, I am not, but I'm showing you a way of just kind of holding and kind of capturing some of the petal work. And this technique that we're doing right now is going to be really helpful figuring out what the heck is going on in the middle. So don't worry too much. For me, I have one petal here in the middle that is like front and center, and I want to make sure that's highlighted. So I'm going to use this edging technique to highlight the edge of that petal. And I have another one up there. So this will help the shading and the edges come out of these interior petals. So this technique will actually help the petals in the middle evolve, like the detail evolve. So I'm just looking around, making sure that I have a little bit. Here we go. You might have some like wild natural petals. You have really skinny ones that might be layered right on top of one another. That's okay. That's really cool. It's okay to have petals land right next to each other. And in the middle, that's what you have, right? You typically have lots of little petals kind of all tucked in on one another. So I'm doing these a little closer together. This outlining is just really magnifying the amount of detail that happens on the interior of a flower. So I'm going to bring this a little closer. All I'm doing is finding where all my white edges are. Where do I need to add a little bit of shading to bring this to life? Maybe it's a bend, maybe it's a curve. Maybe it's an edge kind of opening up or curling down. This is where you can be interpretive, right? You're going to have your own ideas. I encourage you just to kind of be in the moment. But this little, this shading effect and detail that we're doing will help you find those edges that are in the middle of your flower. And I'm using the tip of my brush. I'm going really slow, tiny little lines. And this is a #1 brush. So if you've received brushes from me before, this is the tip that I'm using. And I'm using my pinky to balance my hand. And I'm doing this detail. For me, I'm doing it around each of my petals. It's really making a big difference for me. But I encourage you to do you. And I have lots of petals. As you all know, you just watched me fill them all in. So many petals. beautiful. And there's more tips and techniques that we can do to this flower. And I'll walk you through what some of those are in just a minute. Some of those things may be where you might want to create some extra contrast in between your petals. So as an example, I have a lot more contrast in the picture. There's a lot more darker colors in the middle. So what you can do is to create more darker contrast in the middle, you can add just more medium purple in some areas, so, or a darker purple. So for me, boy, I have a lot of things going on here. I might add a little bit more of a contrast on this petal here in the middle because it's a little too light. So I'm just going to create a little bit, maybe I'll create a separate edge here. So you'll notice areas that you might want to create a little bit more of a contrast. So maybe I'll have a little bit more of a contrast in here. So just lean back in your chair and add in a little bit of more darker purple here and there, just to kind of create more of a center. And see how I added just a little bit? It's just showing that this is the center of the flower. You can add some down in the bottom. Everybody's flowers are also positioned in different ways. So it's really up to you and the way that you've set up your flower and where you want to add that contrast. You can also add more contrast on the underside of any of these petals as well. So a way of doing that is taking a little bit of the darker paint, the darker purple, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of water down here. So a little scoop of the dark purple, and I'm going to mix it with water. And you can do some like softening to create some more shading if you want. So what that looks like is this, a little bit of water with this darker purple. So for down here, I have some petals that are like really overlapping the other, and there's more shading going on. So what I can do is I can create some more shading kind of coming on to the underside of this petal. So see how I'm making the petal kind of underneath it a little bit darker right here? It's a great technique to add a little bit more shading in some areas. So if you wanted to add more shading, do it on the exterior of a petal so it looks like it's casting more of a shadow on the petal kind of underneath it. So that's another shading technique to really bring your petals, to have them jump out, is to make sure it has a nice light edge. And then on the other side of the light edge, it has a little bit of a darker shading shadow on the other side. So if we could spend an hour just doing this, but if I wanted every single one of these petals just to jump right off the page, I could do this technique to every petal and the whole flower would just come to life even more. But you can see down here is the shading technique. So it's a little bit of the light purple and a dark purple and water on the outside edge of this lighter petal. And if I wanted this petal to even jump out a little bit more, I could add a little bit more white to this edge. So it's really just about playing with these techniques. So I want to make sure I have this beautiful kind of dark carved edge out. And there's a lot of things you can do. So just pick one technique and implement it. Again, I recorded this video, so you can always refer back to this on my YouTube channel, the techniques that we've used today. So what I'm going to do is, just to be mindful of time, I'm going to just lean back in my chair, make sure I have these like thin dark purple outlines on all these petals, because that's an important factor for me, just to make sure I don't lose sight of any of these. Just kind of looking around a little bit, making sure I have what we need. See, these light these purple outlines. And sometimes if you want these to be not so dark, you can always come in and just soften them. For me, I'm doing the outline so you can kind of see the effect that it could have. And again, if you want your edges to stand out, doing a lighter purple or a little bit extra white to really highlight these edges is amazing, amazing, amazing. I'm just doing a little bit extra of it so you can see it. Just peppering it in. Again, that blend is really important with the midtone so that it doesn't stand out too much. So taking time to blend that in is important. But I'm just gonna, again, do a quick look and then I'll transition to doing the other flower. I'm doing like green detail on some of these other items. I'll do that really quick and then we can do the background together. And then our paintings can continue to evolve in our own ways. But I'm open to any questions if folks have it, or comments on how this is going. All right. So I'm going to make a green just to fill in some of this greenery that I added. And then I'm going to kind of do a light, actually I'll do the light yellow first. I'll do the easy part first. So I'm going to do a light yellow to kind of fill in the background. I'm going to keep this nice and springy. Don't worry, we'll be doing fall here soon enough. We're going to embrace summer as long as we can. All right, let me find an object here to get my yellow out. All right, so I'm going to do yellow and white as my background color. And it's going to be like a very soft yellow because I don't really want it to take away from what I've started here with my purple. And so I'm going to have a very soft light yellow background and green accents with my side items. And I'm going to use a big brush to fill in the background. So a big brush is like a 1/2 inch or a 1 inch brush, whatever you have on hand. And I'm going to make a light yellow together with you. All right, so a light yellow. I like making this soft canary. It's just a nice warming accent, accented color. A little yellow goes a long way, so I always bring yellow into the white versus the white into the yellow. And I'm going to be a little abstract on how I put this on. It's not going to be anything too crazy. It's just a fun kind of background warming color. And I'm going to be really gentle and careful on how I go around this flower. I do not want to cover up the dark edges that I've put on this flower edge. So I'm just going to slowly work my way around the flower, work my way around some of these other objects. And you can do left, right, left, right. My brush has like a little bit of yellow and white on it. So I'm kind of getting a fun two-tone, which is interesting. So I'm just ever so lightly just gonna paint around any touch-ups you want to do on your flower after you can, like some of those darker edges. I missed a couple spots, which is fine. Not worried about it. I could also have done like a mossy green background. That also would have looked good with these accented greens. So I can always change the background if I want to. Not a big deal. But this is a little bit of a nice break from all the detail work that we've been doing. If anybody wants to pivot, if not, that's fine too. Could also do an orange. Orange and purple are complementary colors. Orangey. I could mix a little bit of pink with this and get a little crazy here. Ooh, a little sorbet, might as well mix it up here. Again, if you don't like something, you can always paint over it, but I'm just being a little free-spirited at the moment and just doing a fun kind of background color. And I did some kind of wispy green, wispy leaves. I'm just going to. I might dip my brush in a little bit of water. Have fun with this color I just came up with. So any colors you want to paint this background, feel free. Art is about just being expressive and in the moment, and mixing up and changing what colors you want to use for your background is such a good example of that. By blending one color into another, it's another fun trick. I might bring in this pink and this orange up in this top right corner. This is just a fun, playful background color for all the work that you've done. Again, you could dip your brush in a little bit of water. You don't have to use pure paint to ever fill a background. And if you don't want to fill your background, you don't have to. You could also just do like a soft beige or a soft white. I'm just being playful with color today. And I'm just going around some of these objects. I can always come back in and make it more precise. But you can see I'm kind of pairing a little bit with the pinks in the top left corner and the bottom corner, and I'll do more yellow maybe up in the top right. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. It's fun just to kind of experiment. There's very little risk in what we're doing because you can always paint over something. So it's fun to be courageous when you paint every once and again. Always. If you wanted to leave a little bit of a white line around your flower, you could. Everybody's going to have their own style and own approach for today's class. Again, white is your friend. It can kind of soften anything that you might need. And just, again, carefully outlining. And pink and yellow make this really pretty sorbet orange, which is so much fun. If you've been in one of my classes before, you've probably seen me use this. But I love bringing in this sorbet orange, especially when the pink and the yellow aren't quite blended together yet. It's like, ooh, that's fun. And you can be really footloose and fancy free on how you add these colors in. And I'll do these green petals and these leaves, a nice green color. Nobody has to include those if you don't want to. I've just kind of peppered some beautiful warming colors around. I wasn't planning on doing this. I'm being in the moment, just like you all are. Sometimes folks think I come to these classes with a plan, and sometimes I don't. Imagine that. Because art is about having a loose plan, but just sometimes knowing to like let yourself be open-minded to how you take an approach or how you go about something. For me, I'm just trying to cover up most of the white, which I did. And I am going to just mix a green using a small brush. I'm first gonna I'll make a regular green first just to fill in some of the stems and the leaves, but the buds on some of these flowers are going to be like a yellowish green. So I'm just going to do the green first, and then I'll do the yellowish green for the buds, which will look really pretty and natural. So green is like 75% yellow and a touch of blue. So I happen to have some yellow over here. So I'm just going to make a little bit of green. You're not going to need much at all. And if you wanted to use a little bit of white just to manage the green that you come up with, you can always add a little bit of white to the green. I'm probably going to add a little bit of white, and I'm not mixing too much. I don't think I'm going to need that much. Let's see here. I'm going to mix a little bit of white to this green just to make like a little bit of a sage green. Not too much of a sage, just kind of a softer grass green is what I'm going for. And again, always take your time to mix the colors that you like. Don't settle for a color. Just take the time to mix the right color. It's a little bit of the patience part of the class. Oh, there you go. Beautiful. It's kind of a soft grass green right there. Perfect. And I'm just going to come in and just do some gentle outlining. And I will do some depth techniques like we did up top with like lightness and darkness. That's why it's good just to get base colors in, just like we did above with the flower. And I want these stems to be fairly narrow, so I'm going to be really careful about how big I make them. I should be using a smaller brush, but I'm just going to be really careful. Don't ever hesitate to switch brushes. I'm going to switch a brush. I'm going to grab one of my smaller brushes just to have a little bit more control. Especially for these petals, I want the tips to be really pointy and clean. So using a smaller brush allows me to better outline the petal shape and better outline the stem with a nice solid color. So the more you paint, the more you learn to like control your actions. And one action to control is just, do I need to use a smaller brush? Or should I be using a different color? Or is this the shape that I want? There's a lot of questions that you get better at asking yourself the more you paint. And I talk through those in my classes for you to start thinking about those, because some are relevant at times and some aren't. And you as the artist can figure out what those questions are and when they're relevant for you. So these are going to look like boring little petals and leaves. I will bring them to life. I am just adding in a little bit of this detail. My inspiration turned very whimsical. I'm just embracing it for what it is. Sometimes with art, we can't judge our art. We just have to just say, okay, this is what you wanted to do tonight. That works. Just look it in the eye and say it is what it is. So that's all right. It's a little bit of like Alice in Wonderland to me, but that's all right. It's okay to paint different things. This is definitely a different thing to paint. And again, I'm just doing some basic green outlines. I'm going to do these objects here a little bit more of a yellowish. So these buds are going to have a little bit more of a yellowish green. That's why I'm leaving them blank right now, but I am outlining these little lines. They're kind of cool. If you look at the picture, if you look at this beautiful flower next to me, there's like these little buds with these little, I don't even know. It's just a part of the flower that helps hold it. And I've included those because it's a really fun natural piece of that flower. And this flower, the Lisianthus, has these beautiful ruffly edges. So if you wanted to go to each petal and add a ruffle edge, you could do that. Maybe if I have time, I'll do that this weekend or later this week. So you're gonna, as the artist, you'll continue to notice, especially when you're painting a real life object, you'll notice different aspects. And based on your comfort level, you might want to paint one thing or another, whatever. Some of you may have to go soon, which I totally understand. If there's anything I can help you with, please let me know before you have to leave. I would love to see your painting when you're done. You could email it to me. I'll keep it private. But I absolutely love seeing how your work has progressed over the class. Once I'm done some of this green work, maybe we take a minute to pause and check on one another, see how we're doing. I'm just doing a basic outline for some of these green objects, and I'll bring them to life with a little bit of lightness and a little bit of shading after. But I just wanted to get a little bit of this color in place, just to show you an example of something you could do if you wanted to. This was totally optional. Again, I switched to a smaller brush to have a little bit more control. And for this flower to really match these other elements, I should technically spend some time and do like significant level of detail work for these other objects for it to match, because the middle is pretty detailed. So I will spend a little bit more time on some of these other areas. I do have like a little bit of a yellowish green right here. So I'm just going to paint these really quick. And then we can do a quick flip and reveal and share our work with one another. I'm sure many of you are working on very similar details. But I like this yellowish bud because it's still growing, it's still fresh, and it matches everything. It's quite nice. These are a little bit more, they have a little bit more white to them, but there's a little bit of this detail that kind of swirls down. So I'll use a little bit of detail here to bring this to life. Cover so slightly. I only have 2 of these, so. And I missed a leaf down here. Some of you probably noticed that I missed a leaf. So it's a good point in the class just to kind of lean back in your chair, making sure you haven't missed anything major, like a leaf as an example, or maybe there's a petal that you forgot on your flower to maybe do a dark edge on, or a petal that is just lost that you need to find an edge. Maybe you add a little bit of white here or there. But I'm going to spin my camera around. Oh, Miss Kayla's in the zone. I don't want to interrupt her. She has lots of beautiful flowers going on. All right. I'm going to remove the spotlight and we're going to check in and see how everybody's doing. Beautiful work, Miss Kayla. Awesome. Folks are welcome to unmute and share with me how tonight's experience was. All right, there's Miss Susan. Beautiful blue vase. What an excellent choice. And Miss Gail, welcome.
Everyone's looks so nice. I'm gonna have to catch up and watch the video, but I'm watching to get the technique down before I start my actual painting.
Perfect. So the technique is, and I'll upload the video tonight. And if you have access to the Facebook page, which I think you do, I'll post the video there as well. So you'll see that.
Thank you. Thanks
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Thanks for joining. All right. Beautiful vase, Miss Susan. That blue is quite perfect. All right. Miss Jean, how many flowers did you decide to paint tonight? I don't know. Jean probably did a lot, I'm guessing. She's shaking her head, yes. It's always so fun for me, I went big, and you just have an idea and you just go for it, right? But I encourage you all to keep painting. I'll do a little bit more detailed work on some of my greens, but I'll go ahead and I'll wrap things up. I want to thank you for coming tonight. I hope you had a wonderful time. I will post the recording, continue painting. If anyone has any questions before I log off, please do not hesitate to ask. But it was so nice seeing each of you. And I look forward to seeing your artwork soon. Excellent. Great to see you. Have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
done. And we all could literally spend another 3 hours. So you do you.
Thank you so
Night.
much, Megan.
You're welcome. Thank you, Gail. And Kayla, thank you so much for joining. Take care.